With the Cardassians completely and utterly destroying the Rebel Alliance, they had collapsed. Without the infrastructure and leadership, they were nothing more than a group of pirates. Several events that took place in the key universe do not take place due to the lack of leadership in the Rebel Alliance. The first off being the fleet is never assembled. The attack on Algernon does not happen. The Death Star is never attacked. Nobody even knows it exists. With the Rebel Alliance no longer established, the systems in the Outer Rim began to fall back to the Empire. Slowly but gradually, the Empire began taking back all the lost land that the rebels had gained over the last few years. This was brutal for the occupants of the planets as the Empire punished them severely. The Cardassians started their two-part plan. The first thing was to develop relationships with the Federations, which they had had a long dispute border war with, and came to a peace treaty. This was done so that they wouldn't have to worry about interference with the Federation. The next part of the plan was to take Mon Calamari cruisers, which had been repurposed for the purpose of transporting Galor-class ships over to the new universe. They had reverse engineered some of the vessels and were in the process of beginning construction of hyperspace capable Galor-class starships. The reversed engineered Galar-class starships were hybridization of Star Trek and Star Wars technology forced upon the rebels through slavery and torture. The Cardassians had been able to reverse engineer the technology. It had taken some time, but they were able to do this with the assistance of the Romulan Tal Shiar. Now the second part of the plan had begun. The second part of the plan was to introduce the Cardassian Union to the Outer Rim worlds and to take over as many systems as possible. They did start taking over many systems and they began a attack of Terra out in the Outer Rim worlds. Eventually, their systems started making it towards Hutt space, where the Hutts did immediately engage the Cardassians in an all-out war. The Cardassians' technology was significantly more advanced than that of the Hutts. The Cardassians' Galar-class cruiser shields were almost 2 to 3 times as strong as anything the Hutts had, even though the ships were only a quarter their size. Also, the distance of firing rates of vessels were significantly better, where the Hutts had to be almost directly on top of the ship to be able to use their turbo lasers. The Cardassians' spiral wave disruptor weapons were capable of firing distances of 200,000 kilometers. This gave a significant increase in technological advantage to the Cardassians, not to mention their shields were more sophisticated than that of the Star Wars ships. The Hutt ships used ray shields and energy shields, so projectile weapons such as torpedoes were incredibly effective against the Hutt vessels. This also gave a significant increase to the technological advantages of the Cardassian Union over the Hutts. As entire populations began to fall to the Cardassian Union, entire worlds as well, entire populations and communities were being beamed off their planet by this strange technology known as transporters. It was terrifying to the people of the Star Wars universe. They had never seen this technology, they had no way of countermeasuring it. They didn't know what it was or what to do. And not to mention the Cardassian Union was incredibly cruel. Some of their victims had escaped, and they had claimed that the Cardassian Union's living standards were even worse than the spice mines of Kessel. The Cardassians continued unopposed, taking system by system by system, and the rumors about the cruelty and the strange technology that the Cardassians wielded put the Outer Rim planets in utter and total chaos and fear. They began begging the Empire to take them back in. There was nobody out there who was capable of stopping the Cardassians except for the Empire. The Empire would have given grand speeches about how it was going to take and rescue its citizens, and it would have done a public execution of the admiral that lost all the systems to the Cardassians, as well as letting everyone know that the Cardassian influence over the sectors was inadvertently done because of the rebel alliance had brought in and led the Cardassians into their space. This was done so that people would realize that the Cardassian Union is actually an incredibly dangerous race and a huge threat to the Empire itself, and that the rebels didn't have any legitimate reason to be fighting the Empire anymore. That they are the sole reason so many hundreds of thousands of people had died because of the Cardassians, and that they are the reasons for the Cardassians being in the systems they are now. The Empire would have sent smaller vessels first, which would have been devastating. Freighters and cruisers would be eliminated quickly and efficiently by the Cardassians. Once the ships came out of hyperspace, they would be met with probably mines or orbital platform defenses, and if that doesn't get them, they still have the Cardassian ships waiting for them. The Cardassian ships have a range of around 200,000 kilometers, meaning they could stand far outside the range of Star Wars vessels and destroy them without them ever getting in firing range. Imperial class Star Destroyers have a max range of 10,000 kilometers, and a standing defense is usually around 1 to 15,000 kilometers is optimal for most Star Wars vessels. So this means that the Cardassians could literally destroy these ships before they ever got in firing range. Not to mention, if they did get into range, the Cardassians could just move out of the way by using either warp or impulse, and the Imperial class Star Destroyers are far too slow to follow them. Their speed is only around 975 miles per hour, which is 1/10 the speed of even impulse speed. This is a huge disadvantage for the Imperial class Star Destroyers and the Imperial class forces. Imperial forces would adapt to the Cardassians' technology and tactics. They would eventually start resembling large fleets. These large fleets would break off into smaller fleets, and the idea would be they would come in at the same time, creating as many targets as possible, launching some fighters and such to try to distract or limit the damage to the head to the vessels. Imperial class Star Destroyers and large vessels would obviously be targeted first. They would take large amounts of damage, and then a micro jump would take the other vessels right on top of the Galar class ships, holding them with tractor beams or just blasting them as soon as possible. Once the Cardassians come in range of the turbo lasers aboard these vessels, they should be able to make short work of the Cardassian vessels. They would overwhelm them with fighters and bombers. Best defense that the Cardassians could probably put after this point is launching its shuttlecrafts and attempting to escape, but most likely the damage to the ships would be enormous in a short amount of time and they would be destroyed. Imperial forces would realize very quickly that frigates and other ships of that similar size are almost worthless against this kind of enemy. They'd be forced to use large ships like dreadnoughts and Imperial class Star Destroyers and ships of similar size and strength and power. They would use numbers to overwhelm the Cardassians and use the same tactics spoken before, but now would replace those smaller ships with more powerful vessels. What would eventually happen is the Cardassians would be destroyed and the ground forces would enter into the battle. Ground forces by the Imperial forces would wipe the Cardassians out quickly and efficiently. The best the Cardassians could do is hope to do guerrilla warfare using transporter devices, but this would be not very effective for very long. The sheer number of Imperial class troops compared to what the Cardassians can field would be almost 1,000 to 1. With even one Star Destroyer breaking the line, it was almost as if there was an endless flood of troops coming in. The Cardassians had never seen anything like this and were not prepared for this. The Empire realized that the Cardassians were not capable of fielding the amount of troops or ships that they could, and they forced them into a war of attrition. This was extremely costly to the Empire, but it didn't matter to the Emperor. As long as the Cardassians were pushed out, that was all that mattered. With the Cardassian-Romulan alliance pushed back, they were forced to create a scorched earth policy as they retreated back into known space, destroying everything in their path. Though this was a victory for the Empire, it was extremely costly. The Empire needed to figure out what it was up against. The Empire's greatest mind was brought in, Grand Admiral Thrawn. His orders were to evaluate the Cardassians' technology and compare that to the Empire. A strict analysis was done. Lord Vader himself began working with Grand Admiral Thrawn on precautions on this new threat. During the annihilation, Grand Admiral Thrawn came to the conclusion that the Imperial class Dreadnought class ships were about the same size as a Galor class cruiser. The Galor class cruiser, though, was able to produce levels of energy that are not seen on a ship of its size. Its shield matrix was even greater than that of an Imperial class Star Destroyer, which was several times larger than that vessel. It also carried a weapon known as a spiral wave heavy disruptor cannon, which was incredibly powerful for a ship of its size. The only thing that could come close to its power output would be super lasers or even Imperial class heavy disruptor turrets seen on only the largest ships, such as the Imperial class Star Destroyer. How a ship this small could generate that much energy was baffling to Admiral Thrawn. As Grand Admiral Thrawn continued his evaluation, his concern wasn't about the technological weapon superiority that had been seen aboard the Galar-class ships, but more the danger of the economic damage that some of the technology could do to the Empire itself. Being able to transport anybody and anything at any point in time on a planet instantaneously was too dangerous. This technology could not get leaked into the rebels or enemy faction. Another concern was the economic damage replicators could create. They had these strange devices that were able to create matter and food out of nothing. This would devastate the Empire's economic hold over food and growth in agriculture. This was probably one of the largest concerns Admiral Thrawn had and let the Emperor know. The Emperor agreed and decided it would be best to wipe the Cardassians off the face of the universe. Admiral Thrawn's other concern was the strange alien races that were seen with these Cardassians. They referred to them as Romulans, and though they were few, their ships were incredibly powerful. They were the size of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, but their weapon systems were leagues above that of even the Cardassians or even the Imperial-class Star Destroyer. One of these vessels could easily go toe-to-toe with Imperial-class Star Destroyer and wipe it out with very little effort. Their weapons were over 100,000 terawatts of damage per bolt. They were like nothing they had ever seen. And then they had this ability to cloak their ship, which was very concerning to Admiral Thrawn because they have no idea where these ships are at, and a ship of that power could be anywhere at any given moment was terrifying, even to Thrawn. Reviewing the battle records, there was a weakness to these dreadnought vessels. The Warbird and its allies with the Cardassian Galar-class cruiser were acceptable to ionic weapons, so ion cannons were able to short-circuit their shields and damage or deactivate the vessels. They seemed to have little to no resistance to ionic weapons. This would give the Imperials an advantage. This has been Trek Wars, Episode 2, Cardassia.